On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected.
Thank you to all our amazing channel members for your generous support.
Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most provocative philosophers of the 19th century, died on August 25, 1900, at the age of 55. His death came after a decade-long mental and physical decline that followed a complete psychological collapse in 1889, often referred to as the Turin breakdown. The cause of death was primarily complications from pneumonia and multiple strokes, though debates persist about whether his deteriorating health was rooted in syphilis, a genetic condition, or other neurological disorders. Regardless of the precise cause, Nietzsche's decline reflected the fragility of the human body at a time when medical science was still ill-equipped to treat degenerative illnesses, and it cast a tragic shadow over the life of a man whose philosophy celebrated vitality, strength, and the will to power. The immediate consequence of Nietzsche's death was not a surge in fame, but rather a period of misinterpretation. His sister, Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche, who controlled his literary estate, selectively edited and promoted his works to align with nationalist and proto-fascist ideologies. This distorted legacy temporarily reshaped how his ideas were received in early 20th century Europe, particularly during the rise of fascism. In this sense, his death created a paradox. While his philosophy was misused for political agendas he likely would have rejected, the very controversies surrounding these appropriations amplified his visibility in global intellectual discourse. In the decades that followed, Nietzsche's reputation transformed dramatically. Existentialist thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Martin Heidegger drew upon his critiques of morality, religion, and human purpose, embedding him into the fabric of modern philosophy. His untimely decline and tragic end only deepened the aura surrounding him, an almost prophetic figure whose life embodied the struggle between brilliance and suffering. His death, then, amplified his legend by intertwining his philosophy with the image of a tortured genius undone by his own intensity and frailty. Nietzsche's passing highlights humanity's enduring fascination with mortality, power, and memory. We immortalize figures like him through careful reinterpretations in philosophy, literature, and art, continuously re-examining their words to find relevance in new contexts. His case also reveals the dangers of posthumous appropriation, how the memory of a thinker can be reshaped for better or worse by those who inherit their legacy. Ultimately, Nietzsche's death reminds us that human mortality does not end influence. Instead, it transforms it, ensuring that ideas live on in ways even their authors could never fully control. Neil Armstrong, the first human to set foot on the moon, died on August 25, 2012, at the age of 82, following complications from cardiovascular surgery. His passing was natural, tied to the health struggles of aging, yet it carried profound symbolic weight. Armstrong represented a generation that had lived through the Cold War, the space race, and humanity's first ventures beyond Earth. His quiet death, far removed from the global spotlight that defined his historic 1969 Apollo 11 mission, reflected the paradox of his life. A man who achieved one of history's most public feats, but spent the rest of his days seeking privacy and humility. The immediate consequences of Armstrong's death were felt worldwide. Tributes poured in from political leaders, astronauts, and ordinary citizens who had watched him step onto the lunar surface with the immortal words, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." His passing reminded the world of an era of exploration defined not by profit or conquest, but by curiosity, courage, and national rivalry channeled into scientific achievement. For the United States, it reignited nostalgia for a time when space exploration unified the nation and showcased technological supremacy during a tense geopolitical period. In death, Armstrong's legend only deepened. He had already resisted efforts to commercialize his image, avoiding the cult of celebrity that surrounded other astronauts and instead choosing to teach engineering and support aerospace advancements quietly. This humility contrasted with the scale of his accomplishment, making his life story all the more compelling. His death amplified his status as a symbol of human perseverance and ingenuity, a reminder of how individuals can embody the aspirations of entire civilizations. Armstrong's passing also reveals how humanity ties mortality to memory and meaning. Death often crystallizes achievements, transforming individuals into icons. Armstrong is immortalized not only in textbooks and museums, but also through cultural commemoration. Statues, lunar-themed artworks, films like First Man, and the continued retelling of the Apollo 11 story. These acts of remembrance show how we confront mortality by ensuring that remarkable lives are never forgotten. Ultimately, Armstrong's death underscores a larger truth about humanity's relationship with power and memory. We honor those who dared to extend our boundaries, whether geographical, intellectual, or spiritual. His departure invites us to see mortality not as an erasure, but as a passage into legend, one small step toward immortality through collective memory. Aaliyah Dana Houghton, known simply as Aaliyah, was one of the brightest rising stars in music and film when her life was cut short on August 25, 2001, at the age of 22. She died in a tragic plane crash in the Bahamas shortly after filming the music video for Rock the Boat. The small aircraft, overloaded with equipment and passengers, crashed moments after takeoff, killing all 9 people on board. Her death was sudden, violent, and shocking, an abrupt end to a career that symbolized the youthful creativity and global influence of late 1990s and early 2000s R&B and hip-hop culture. The circumstances of her death reflected both the opportunities and dangers of her era. By the early 2000s, the music industry had become a global enterprise where stars were expected to work tirelessly, travel constantly, and meet the demands of a fast-moving entertainment machine. Aaliyah was not only a singer, but also branching into film with roles in Romeo Must Die and Queen of the Damned, signaling a new generation of crossover artists. Her passing highlighted the risks of such relentless schedules and the human cost of fame, where safety was sometimes overshadowed by production pressures. The immediate consequences were profound. Fans worldwide mourned not just a celebrity, but a young woman whose style and sound had already reshaped R&B with her blend of smooth vocals, futuristic production, and effortless cool. Her death shocked the music industry, prompting an outpouring of grief from fellow artists like Missy Elliott and Timbaland, who had helped craft her distinctive sound. The tragedy also reignited conversations about aviation safety and small charter flights, an issue that had claimed the lives of other artists before her. In death, Aaliyah's legend grew even larger. She became an emblem of unrealized potential, often referred to as the Princess of R&B. Her music and fashion continue to influence artists decades later, from Rihanna to Drake, while posthumous releases and tributes helped cement her place in cultural memory. Unlike figures whose legacies are defined by long careers, Aaliyah's story resonates as one of brilliance gone too soon. Her early passing amplifying the sense of loss and what could have been. Her death reveals much about humanity's relationship with memory and mortality. We immortalize those who die young, especially artists, by projecting onto them the dreams they never had time to fulfill. Through documentaries, murals, tribute performances, and her enduring music, Aaliyah remains alive in the cultural imagination. Her departure reminds us that while mortality ends a life, it can also magnify a legacy, turning talent into timeless myth. Carl Barks, often called the Good Duck artist, passed away on August 25, 2000, at the age of 99 in Grants Pass, Oregon. His death was from natural causes, the quiet close of a long and remarkably influential life. Unlike many figures whose deaths come suddenly or violently, Barks's passing was reflective of a man who had lived fully into old age, leaving behind a body of work that had already shaped generations. His longevity allowed him to witness his transformation from an anonymous comic artist into a cultural icon recognized worldwide. Barks's career was defined by his work at Disney, where he created enduring characters like Scrooge McDuck, Gyro Gearloose, and the Beagle Boys, as well as countless adventures starring Donald Duck. For much of his working life, he toiled in relative obscurity. Disney artists were not credited publicly, and it was only in the 1960s, when fans began uncovering his identity, that he received recognition. The manner of his death, peaceful and untroubled, contrasts sharply with the larger-than-life adventures he wrote. It also reflects an era when the comic book medium, once dismissed as children's fare, had begun to be taken seriously as an art form, with Barks finally celebrated as a master storyteller. The immediate consequences of his passing were felt most keenly among artists, fans, and historians. Tributes poured in from around the world, especially from Europe, where Barks's stories had been revered for decades, and where Scrooge McDuck had become a cultural touchstone. His death did not derail a movement, but rather underscored the enduring relevance of his contributions. In many ways, it amplified his legend. The quiet craftsman who had anonymously shaped childhoods for millions, only to be recognized late in life as a genius of narrative and illustration. Barks's death highlights humanity's deep connection between memory, creativity, and immortality. Mortality may have claimed him, but his characters live on, continuing to delight new generations in comics, television, and film. Through statues, fan conventions, reprints of his stories, and even the reverence of fellow artists like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, who cited his work as an influence, Barks remains immortal. His passing reminds us that while human life is finite, imagination creates legacies that transcend time. Paul Muni, one of Hollywood's most respected character actors, passed away on August 25, 1967, at the age of 71 in Montecito, California, after a long battle with a heart disorder. His death was from natural causes, yet it carried symbolic weight in an era when the golden age of Hollywood was already giving way to a new wave of filmmaking. Muni, whose career was defined by his intense dedication to craft and transformative performances, embodied the values of an earlier Hollywood that prized artistry, depth, and the elevation of acting to a near-sacred profession. Muni rose to prominence in the 1930s with powerhouse performances in films like Scarface and I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, works that reflected the turbulence of Depression-era America. His willingness to portray deeply flawed yet compelling figures resonated with audiences struggling to make sense of rapid social and economic changes. Later, he achieved acclaim for his historical portrayals, winning an Academy Award for the story of Louis Pasteur. By the time of his death, however, Muni had largely withdrawn from public life, battling illness and fading from the spotlight just as Hollywood was shifting toward more experimental and youth-driven cinema. The immediate consequence of his passing was a wave of tributes from actors, critics, and fans who recognized him as one of the great pioneers of serious screen acting. While his death did not shift the direction of Hollywood in the way the loss of a young star might have, it reinforced the idea of Muni as a bridge between stage traditions and cinematic artistry. In fact, his passing amplified his legend. He became remembered not just as an actor, but as a symbol of integrity, a performer who prioritized substance over celebrity. Mooney's death invites reflection on how we immortalize figures who dedicate their lives to art rather than fame. Humanity's relationship with mortality is often mediated through cultural memory, and in Mooney's case, his performances continue to live on as testaments to the power of cinema to reflect human struggle, resilience, and transformation. We preserve his legacy not through monuments, but through the continued viewing and study of his films, which remind us of a time when acting itself was regarded as a noble pursuit. His passing underscores how memory can turn even a relatively private man into an enduring figure of artistic reverence. Edward Ted Kennedy, the youngest brother of the famed Kennedy political dynasty, died on August 25, 2009, at the age of 77 from a malignant brain tumor. His death, though from natural causes, was emblematic of both personal resilience and public service, in an era when the Kennedy family had already become a symbol of American tragedy and perseverance. Kennedy had spent over 4 decades in the U.S. Senate, becoming known as the Lion of the Senate for his ability to navigate partisan divides and craft legislation on healthcare, civil rights, and education. His passing closed a chapter in the Kennedy family's direct influence on national politics, while also reviving reflections on the burdens and expectations tied to his famous name. Kennedy's illness and eventual death mirrored the challenges of an era deeply engaged in debates over healthcare reform. Just months before his passing, President Barack Obama was pressing forward with the Affordable Care Act, a cause Kennedy had long championed. His absence from the Senate during the critical months of debate highlighted both his influence and the fragility of legislative momentum without him. For many Americans, Kennedy's passing seemed to symbolize the unfinished nature of America's struggle for accessible health care, a value he had fought for until the very end. The immediate consequences of his death were profound in both politics and public sentiment. His funeral, held in Boston and attended by presidents and world leaders, underscored the weight of his contributions. At the same time, his death marked the end of an era when the Kennedy family's political presence felt almost inevitable. Without Ted's voice, the family's role in shaping American policy largely shifted into history and commemoration rather than active governance. Kennedy's death amplified his legend by recentering his legacy not on personal controversies, such as the Chappaquiddick incident, but on decades of legislative achievement. His story reflects humanity's complicated relationship with mortality and redemption. The idea that a lifetime of public service can outweigh personal failings, and that memory often softens sharp judgments over time. We immortalize Kennedy not through statues alone, but through the very laws he shaped, the institutions that carry his name, and the enduring vision of politics as a vehicle for social justice. His death reminds us that memory, when tied to public good, can be a powerful force for preserving ideals long after the individual is gone. Marpessa Dawn, the American-born actress best remembered for her luminous role in Black Orpheus, 1959, passed away on August 25, 2008, in Paris at the age of 74. Her death from natural causes came only a few weeks after the passing of her co-star, Breno Mello, a coincidence that stirred a wave of nostalgic reflection on the enduring magic of the film that had introduced both of them to the world. Unlike many Hollywood stars whose deaths came amid scandal or spectacle, Dawn's quiet departure reflected the often overlooked reality of artists who achieve sudden fame, yet spend much of their later lives outside the public eye. Her passing spoke to the cultural values and challenges of her era. Dawn had been a symbol of transnational cinema at a time when the world was captivated by new forms of artistic expression emerging from outside Hollywood. Black Orpheus, a French-Brazilian production, not only won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, but also an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, helping to expand global cinema's reach. Dawn's image became tied to the romantic ideal of youth, beauty, and tragedy in an exoticized Brazil, a reflection of the mid-20th century's fascination with cultural hybridity, though also tinged with the era's limitations in how it represented race and identity. The immediate consequence of her death was a renewed interest in Black Orpheus, which was rewatched and reassessed by critics and audiences alike. For many, her passing reawakened appreciation of how the film bridged art house cinema and popular storytelling, influencing later artists from musicians to filmmakers. Her death did not shift global politics or history, but it amplified her legend as part of a cultural moment that continues to echo in discussions of film, identity, and the power of myth. Reflecting on Dawn's departure reveals humanity's yearning to capture fleeting beauty and immortalize it through art. While she lived largely outside the limelight after her brief cinematic fame, her image, forever young on screen, became a timeless emblem. Through film festivals, restored prints, and the continued influence of Black Orpheus on music and literature, Dawn is remembered not as she aged, but as the radiant face of a cinematic masterpiece. Her death reminds us that memory often fixes individuals at their most iconic moment, revealing both the power and the fragility of art to preserve human presence across time. Michael Faraday, one of the most influential scientific minds of the 19th century, died on August 25, 1867, in Hampton Court, England, at the age of 75. His death was from natural causes, the slow decline of a man who had long suffered from memory loss and ill health, conditions that had already curtailed his research in his later years. In an era when industrialization was rapidly reshaping society, Faraday's passing symbolized the end of a life devoted to harnessing the unseen forces of nature, electricity and magnetism, and transforming them into knowledge that would drive the modern world. Faraday's era was one of intense curiosity and discovery, but also of growing recognition that science could hold both promise and peril. His meticulous experiments had laid the foundations for the electric motor, the dynamo, and the principles of electromagnetic induction. Yet Faraday himself remained modest, turning down a knighthood and refusing burial in Westminster Abbey, choosing instead the quiet dignity of Highgate Cemetery. His death thus reflected not only the fragility of human life, but also the humility of a man who valued discovery over prestige. The immediate consequences of Faraday's passing were marked by widespread tributes across Britain and Europe. He was mourned not simply as a scientist, but as a public educator who had inspired generations through his Royal Institution lectures, especially those crafted for young audiences. His death underscored a moment of transition in science, as his protégés and successors carried forward the torch of experimental physics into an age that would soon see electricity become the backbone of modern industry. Faraday's death amplified his legend as much as his life's work had. He became immortalized as the archetype of the self-taught genius, a man of humble origins, born to a blacksmith's family, who rose to shape the modern understanding of energy. In the years following his death, he was celebrated in literature, commemorated through statues, and enshrined in the very language of science, with the term Farad forever linking his name to the study of electricity. Reflecting on his passing, we are reminded that humanity's relationship with mortality often finds solace in legacy. Faraday's life and death show how intellectual contributions, unlike physical existence, endure across generations. Through commemoration in education, art, and even in the technology that powers our daily lives, Faraday lives on. Proof that memory and progress are among our most enduring ways of defying mortality.